Music. It's a pretty powerful thing, huh? To quote Aussie hip-hop group Bliss and Esso's Pale Blue Dot, how does music place itself in your brain? Why does it make you dance? Why does it make you think? Of the many music categories that exist, there's one prominent genre that has a reputation for delivering nostalgic blow after nostalgic blow. If you're not sure, I'm talking about synthwave. It's a fairly populated genre, but for me, nobody does it better than the Midnight. So, if you're a fan of smooth saxophone solos, aesthetical arpeggios, or indulging in memories of days gone past, then please join me as we explore the Midnight, masters of nostalgia. So, what is a video about a band without a little bit about the people behind the music? The Midnight consists of Danish producer Tim McEwan and Georgia native Tyler Lyle. There are also some other important people who are involved with the music like Oliver McEwan, Thomas Edinger, Jesse Malloy, Lelia Broussard, Royce Whittaker and Nikki Flores. There's not exactly an exhaustive list, but it should give you an idea of the other talents that they work with both in the studio and on tour. Unlike a lot of bands that come into being, both Tim and Tyler were already established musicians in their own right. Tyler achieved national acclaim for his debut album The Golden Age and The Silver Girl, among other accomplishments, and Tim had been a producer for Danish production team DK. He also played the drums during Brink's Eurovision entry back in 2009, rocking a pretty cool pair of shades if I do say so. It would definitely be fair to say that the pair come from quite different music backgrounds, both bringing a wealth of knowledge and experiences to the table. Tim and Tyler first met each other at a writing workshop in LA back in 2012, where they spent some time creating a demo track for the song We Move Forward, which went on to become the duo's first release and the backbone for their EP Days of Thunder. The band rolls with the motto Mono no Aware, which is a Japanese phrase that directly translates as a pathos of things. Tim and Tyler describe it more specifically as the sad beauty of seeing time pass, the aching awareness of impermanence. Most, if not all of us, will feel it at some point, but will likely struggle to externalize how we're feeling, which is why being able to offload it vicariously through things like music is so important. Like a lot of the arts, music is self-expression, but it also has power to inspire and entertain others. Not everyone is going to like what you do, but that's just life. Everybody has different tastes, and music is no different. Looking back, the 80s and the 90s were packed full of cultural events and styles that still impact society today. I mean, I wasn't born until the 90s, so I never really experienced true 80s culture, but I'd say that I managed to catch the tail end of life pre-internet, or at least before it was commonplace to have a home computer. For, like, internet purposes. Obviously not just general home computers, because that would probably be before the 90s. I wouldn't say that my experiences are the same as people 10, 20, 30 years older than me, but the music I listened to and the film and TV that I watched mainly came from those days, so there's some part of my upbringing that's cemented in that era. So I think because of that, most people born between 1970 and probably 2010 are going to have a lot more in common with each other than they might first think. I think that's why nostalgia works with this kind of thing, and why music like synthwave is so popular. A lot of 80s and 90s films had synth-heavy soundtracks, and a lot of home media in that time came in analog formats that affected the quality of the visuals and the audio. You'll notice with the emergence of lo-fi music that there is a demand for less than perfect audio, so I wouldn't be surprised if there is a connection between them. If you're not really sure what I'm talking about with the whole lo-fi thing, don't worry. I'm going to play you a snippet of one of my favourite songs by The Midnight raw, and then through a cassette emulator. So you're going to get an idea of the type of audio degradation that is typical with lo-fi music, or analog music in general.
When I dream we're all melting together, synchronized in a mass embrace, beads of water falling together like a North Shore wave, how strange.
So as you can hear, there's an obvious difference in the high ends and the low ends. They're noticeably less dynamic, and some would say the overall sound is wavy. Hey, because the song's called Wave, get it? Anyway, it's kind of a less technical way of describing pitch variations in a recording. Some of the critics of the genre harp on about how synthwave, retrowave, and all similar genres misrepresent the quality of tapes and vinyls, and that they distort perception of how analog formats sound. Personally, I really like the warm sound that analog has, and I've got a good collection of licorice pizzas for that very reason. I think music genres like synthwave are always going to be the natural progression of throwback media. Series like Stranger Things have shown how much the Western world hasn't moved on from the neon-lit boombox on the shoulder aesthetic of the 80s. If television and film are allowed to flirt back and forth between the past and the present, then music really shouldn't be the exception. Studies have shown that being nostalgic generally increases happiness and helps you feel less lonely. I've been spending a lot of my time outside lately and enjoying the sun, listening to some music, and I figured there'd be a good amount of people who are looking for their summer of 2022 soundtrack. After spending a lot of time cooped up over the last 2 years, I'm sure you'll want something that'll make you feel good and back amongst it, and with another album coming, it'd be the perfect time to start immersing yourself in the tapestry of the midnight. If you've ever found yourself reminiscing about your childhood and wondering if things really were better back then you're definitely not alone. When we were kids and growing up, our world was being built around us with each new day, but as adults, we tend to just add to those foundations. It would be fair to say that there's certainly less variation in our daily lives as adults, but that's usually by choice or habit. Music and television have been the portal into another world for the majority of people since they became commonplace to have in the house. So it can't be any surprise that media that focuses around the pop culture of the 80s and 90s are so popular today. It all revolves around nostalgia. You probably hear the word nostalgia getting bandied around a fair bit online, so before we take a deep dive into the discography, it definitely makes sense to wrangle with nostalgia and nail down some form of a definition. As always, I'll do my best to use dictionaries wherever possible, and even though they might not be the most up-to-date with new terms, they're the best port of call for official meanings. The general idea is that it's an emotional response that triggers memories or emotions of something from the past. Everyone will have their own set of triggers for those feelings, so it's hard to put a strict set of parameters on what makes something nostalgic. But as I mentioned earlier, television, film and music tend to be three of the most common things that people bring up. As per the Merriam-Webster dictionary, nostalgia is generally defined as being a wistful or excessively sentimental yearning for a return to a past period or irrecoverable condition. According to Lexico, it's a sentimental longing or wistful affection for a period in the past. And you might notice there are a couple of common things that seem to hang under the word nostalgia wherever you go, and that's wistfulness, sentimentality, and the past. For those who might not be familiar with the terms wistful and sentimental, I'll give you a quick rundown now, because they're not really words that you come across very often. Wistful is showing or having a vague or regretful longing for something, and sentimentality is the exaggerated or self-indulgent tenderness or sadness. They actually both have some semantic overlap, so it's no surprise that they're so compatible with each other. As for the science behind nostalgia, well, the term nostalgia was coined by Swiss physician Jonas Hofer in his 1688 thesis on nostalgia or homesickness, and was often the diagnosis for the condition known as Schweizer Heimweh. Fast forward a couple hundred years or two, and researchers were looking for a specific part of the body where nostalgia came from. We might laugh now with the knowledge that we have, but it really was a bane for our ancestors to the point that it was actually considered a disease. Nowadays, most of us revel in a bit of nostalgia, whether it's in the form of music, television, film, the list goes on. There is no real consistency, and that can make it a treasured commodity in times of adversity. Even though some people might call you a daydreamer or accuse you of living in the past, there's nothing wrong with a healthy dose of nostalgia. As the process of nostalgia goes, it's been shown to increase self-esteem, optimism, and generally bring people together. In more contemporary times, with various pandemics and social issues causing people to become more reclusive and isolated, it's no wonder why mediums that invoke a feeling of nostalgia are so popular. And it raises the question, how can one genre of music be so nostalgic for such a wide demographic of people? It likely comes down to the way that society preserves elements that are well received. Synthwave and similar genres take a lot of influence from 80s and 90s culture, so it only makes sense for those influences to be refined over time. It might be the reason why you enjoy something synthwave based, but not a lot of 80s or 90s music. Think of it in the context of sampling. You might like a song by a rapper that has a sample from a 1980s song at the core of its composition, yet you might not like the song itself. Sometimes the right combination of instruments and solid production can appeal to a wider audience than the original. And I like to think that synthwave is a lot like that analogy. You might not like The Breakfast Club or The Goonies, but you love Stranger Things. It's not made in the 80s, and it's not a pure product of the time that it's set in, but more of a contemporary reimagining of the period. There has been research conducted on autobiographical memories that show that music played in the home environment as an adolescent can have a profound experience on recalled events later in life. There was a peak in the 1960s, and there would appear to be a peak happening right now. It might go a long way to explaining why most of us born in the late 70s through to the 2010s will have a nostalgic response to synthwave music. There are so many elements of popular music throughout those decades weaved into the fabric of the genre that it can't help but appeal to a wide demographic. Even if you consciously reject the notion that media from those decades were hugely influential on your childhood, your unconscious mind may say something different. Plus, society doesn't just down tools and press reset every time a new zero rolls around. There's a gradual progression that never stops. The 70s bled into the 80s, and those decades bled into the 90s, and so on and so forth. It started out centuries ago and has been cascading down generations ever since. And we're pretty predictable beings, us humans. We have a lot more things in common than we'd probably like to give each other credit for. It's one of the many reasons why marketing is so effective. We all have internal desires, needs, and emotions that are innate and beyond our control. Certain things just click with us, and music is one of those things. The influences of synthwave wouldn't exist if there wasn't an audience for them in the first place, and those influences are powerful enough to transcend generations. At the bottom line, even though we might all look different, our brains work in very similar ways regardless of where or when you grew up. The existence of nostalgia has been observed across different cultures, which only gives that statement more credence. Sometimes it's best not to try and explain why something makes you feel happy. Other times it might bring you a great sense of satisfaction to get all of the interrogatives answered. So hopefully our little exploration into what nostalgia is can give you a firm footing for the rest of the video and maybe even in your life beyond. Without further interlude, grab a snack or a drink, or both. It's time for some music. Depending on your taste of music, I'm sure that there's plenty enough here for you to take at least something away from this video. With a catalogue of 4 albums and 3 EPs, not including instrumental versions, remixes, or compilations, there's a breadth of synth-based content to explore. I'm going to presume that if you're watching this video, you're at least open to hearing about electronic music, so hopefully you'll find something new here. If you're not so open, stick around anyway, because the band's philosophy is to combine, not confine, so not everything is strictly electronic. I'm going to break things down on an album-by-album basis, and then we'll go through the community side of things towards the end. I chose not to include one-off songs, such as Sometimes She Smiles and Cold Pizza, the remix compilations, as well as the multitude of remixes that the band have done themselves, just so that things are as concise as possible. Also, what would be left for you to discover if I played everything? As I said earlier, everything will be timestamped, so if you want to skip ahead, or you want to look back through when you're done, you can do that. Cue Days of Thunder. On July 15th, 2014, the Midnight released their debut EP, To the World. A 6-track homage to the City of Angels described eloquently on Bandcamp as the first fruit of the Midnight. With each main release in this video, I'm going to give some previews of some of the songs, a little bit of information, and then my opinion on them. I'll also give each album a rating out of 100, just for a little bit of extra fun. I think all the releases are great, so the ratings are based more on their meanings to me, rather than being necessarily an indication of their quality or anything like that, so you can make your own mind up on what you think of them. Any streaming figures that I reference are from Spotify for no other reason than it's the easiest platform to get data from, and the one that I presume most people will be listening on. Days of Thunder was actually my first experience with the Midnight back in 2015, but it was only going to be a year later with the release of Endless Summer that I began listening regularly. I'm going to make an exception with this release in that I'm going to play clips from every song just so that you have an idea of the variety and depth of their musical style. Going forwards, I'll look to use around 3 songs per EP and 6 per album. That way there's a good sample from each release, but you'll also get to discover the others on your own and have that experience to yourself. Days of Thunder was also the first release that featured Danish saxophonist Thomas Edinger and fellow Danish musician and producer Oliver McEwan, who just so happens to be Tim's brother. Let's get things rolling with The Years. I think that's a really strong song to start on, with poetic lyrics and some wonderful layering that swells and gives a great atmosphere. In a genre that's often associated with processed vocals, Tyler does an incredible job at bringing a unique and pure style to the scene. Gloria brings a much faster paced feeling to the album, and it gives us the first of many synth solos. It was also one of the few songs demoed by Tyler before the Midnight became a thing, and it's really interesting to see how the different styles translate to each other.
Hanging out of a third-story window, oh, you were a sight to see. The black dress that bends when the wind blows. Roll back the tide for me.
We Move Forward is a great track for getting your pump on. It's energetic, but it's also disciplined, which is great if you're out for a run or going for a spin on your Hot Wheels. I know a couple of people who would probably say that it's their favourite song or the song that they relate to most, which I probably wouldn't have expected, to be honest. Days of Thunder, the titular song, and perhaps the song that I listen to least for no other reason than I feel that some of the other songs are stronger. If you're into songs with a little more of a darker tone to them, then I definitely recommend it. I think that Thomas Eddinger's saxophone solo is definitely a highlight of the album and sets the precedent for some really special moments in future songs.
I prefer kick drums and red wine.
Kick Drums and Red Wine is my favourite song of the album, no doubt about it. The Jupiter 8 synthesizer and the delayed plucks bring some incredible dimension to a track already packed with depth. The synth solo by Tim and Oliver gives the track that extra bit of space to top off an already incredible composition. It's one of those songs that I just can't quite put into words why I like it so much, but I do. And if you're taking recommendations, please start here. Los Angeles is the final song on the EP, and it almost feels like a temporary goodbye. You can imagine it being the ending song in a movie. It's probably my second favourite song out of the 6, and it's the most listened to on Spotify, so it's clearly a fan's favourite. I consider it to be the golden standard of the Midnight sound going forward, and I'd imagine it's a super nostalgic song for a lot of people. For a rating, I give Days of Thunder 88 out of 100. As a debut release, it's really strong and it lays the foundations for so many of the things that the band excels at today. I don't think I've heard many debut albums where the creators have such a defined and distinct sound right from the outset. Tim's production is super tight and nuanced, and the lyrics and vocals exhibit why Tyler is so revered for his craft. If I'm to find something to be critical of and to justify not giving it 100 out of 100, It would be that I don't feel that they all come together quite as well as later releases do. And I know that that's being pedantic, but it's only fair to try and give both sides of the coin. I'll also caveat that by saying I came across this album mostly on a track-by-track basis, so giving it a rating in retrospect isn't the easiest thing to do, so I'm sorry if it comes across as really picky. The instrumentals for Days of Thunder were released on March 20th, 2016, and the stems for the songs on May 7th, 2021. If you're interested in the layers that make up the songs, or you want to hear them without vocals, then be sure to check them out. And you can always do the same for all of the other major releases. On August 5th, 2016, 2 years after releasing Days of Thunder, The Midnight released their first full-length album titled Endless Summer. It's also around the time that I really jumped on board as a listener. I'm going to go by the 5th year anniversary edition of Endless Summer because it has 2 bonus tracks that weren't previously available online. Endless Summer builds on the distinctive foundations laid by Days of Thunder. Throughout 2015, Tim and Tyler posted snippets of songs, including a couple that never made it to the final release, which was the first real step into bridging that gap between creator and consumer. Thomas Edinger was to return on saxophone, and singer Nikki Flores was to make her debut collaboration with the band, providing vocals on the song Jason. Additional work on the album was done by Oliver McEwan, Johannes Jørgensen, and Mads Storm, and the album was mastered by Anders Schumann, who had returned to work on Nocturnal later on. The album gets its name from the Bruce Brown surfing documentary The Endless Summer. In a Reddit AMA, Tim explained that it gave him the yearning for summer to never end. There's something that I often think about when I'm listening to the album, and it's the concept of an endless summer. And it's weird because it's so vague but so specific at the same time. You and I have completely different memories, but I'm sure we'll both have a summer that we wish lasted forever. Hell, it could have even been a winter for all I know, but the concept is still the same. I think this album is a perfect mix of emotive and expressive songwriting and immensely knowledgeable production. Tim and Tyler shine from start to finish, and it's a real must-listen for anyone who thinks that they have unfinished business in the past.
Disappeared in a camera flash. Why do the bad girls never last? Lost in gin and lemonade, electro spins in the mermaid parade.
Endless Summer. It's the title song. It's flawless. I mean, it is really flawless. There's just so much to like about this song. As soon as I hear that arpeggio in the opening pads, it's like I'm being transported to a completely different realm. You couldn't ask for more from an opening song, and you'll find a very similar thing later in the video at the start of the Monsters album. Even though the lyrics are minimal, they're incredibly resonant and just the right amount to change the pace of the song. Sunset is the most streamed song from the album on Spotify. I guess for that reason we could call it the people's favourite, and it really isn't hard to see why. The chorus is bound to have you singing along. It's super catchy. Reading through comments on YouTube, the song is clearly symbolic for a lot of people who grew up in the 80s, many of which give their own stories that the song provokes. Much like Los Angeles, it has this Disney-like feeling to it, and Johannes' guitar solo brings the whole song to a powerful conclusion. Now, I'm guilty of track skipping Daytona whenever it would come up, and that's why I've opted to put it in over a couple of other songs. It was only on a coach ride home with no Wi-Fi that I listened to it all the way through, and man, did I regret having ignored it for so long. Admittedly, the first couple of minutes are a bit repetitive, but it builds up to that incredible Mud Storm synth solo. Tell me what you're chasing, Jason. Another fan favourite hit and the first song to feature Nikki Flores on vocals. Tyler and Nikki have a great vocal dynamic together, and the reverb and mixing on the track only amplified that. This one's for the saxophone lovers, of which I know there are many. Thomas Edinger is back again, this time on an alto sax, and I've got to say the altissimo notes that he hits might be some of the most impressive pieces of playing I've ever heard. If you're basing it only on streaming numbers, I think that The Comeback Kid is probably the most underrated song on Endless Summer. It's a song for those who have struggled and come back stronger. If you're still here, then the song is for you. Out of all the songs on the album, I think that this one sums up the feeling of an endless summer the most.
Tattoo on your shoulder, we'll know better when we're older. You'll always be a part of me.
If you're the type of person that often finds yourself reminiscing about the past or feeling nostalgic, then Memories is the song for you. As the last song to be written on the album, it's no surprise that Memories rounds off a well-crafted set with such wistfulness. I love it. I really, really love it. I'm not going to analyse it or dig into it because I really want you to experience it yourself.
If the sun's not up, I'll bring it to you. If my mind says stop, my heart will know what to do.
I couldn't make this list without having something with Tim on vocals. And I'd say that Comet is my joint second favourite song on the album, and it was only made widely available in late 2021 with the release of the 5-year anniversary edition. I find the lyrics deeply romantic, and even as a traditionally masculine man, I'm not afraid to say that I appreciate that. I like it. I had a bit of a tough time picking which songs to preview, as I wanted to save some gems for you guys to find on your own. That doesn't mean that I think these songs are necessarily better than the others, or that the other ones that I didn't include deserve less attention. If you're less acquainted with The Midnight, then you'd be forgiven for thinking that Tyler sounds a little bit different on synthetic, because, as with Comet, it's actually Tim. The lyrics make me think of Asimov's The Bicentennial Man, which I read 5 years ago. Except in the book, it's the opposite way around and he wants to be a human. If you're into the slower, more contained songs, then Synthetic is a great place to start. On the rest of the album, you have The Equalizer, which is a song that I'm never really sure where I stand with. I like the overall flow and the vocoder, but I just think there are other songs on the album that does what it does better. If you love Jason, then you'll love Jason Premium, aka Vampires. If you're a fan of saxophone solos, then Vampires is definitely a great song for you, as well as Crockett's Revenge, which is the holy grail if you're a fan of a bit of saxophone. Over 5 minutes of non-stop smooth saxophone playing from, you guessed it, Thomas. Then there's Nighthawks and Lonely City, which go really, really well together. They kind of fade into each other. And then there's Bend, which is another saxophone-laden song that works really well as a slower ballad, and was also, along with Comet, only widely released with the 5th anniversary edition. Tyler's vocal performance on the album is one of the best I've ever heard, period. If you ever feel like I gloss over some of the lyrical side of the songs, it's not being done out of ignorance or neglect. I just don't always feel that I could consistently do his writing and performances justice with every song. If there's one specific praise that I can give to him outside of those that I already do, it's that he has phenomenal consistency. Usually when you compare a band's live performances to their studio albums, there's a disparity. It's not necessarily anyone's fault. Live performances can be pretty taxing on the old voice box, and there isn't the opportunity to start again whenever you don't hit things right. Across live performances and studio recordings, he can sing. During the 2020 lockdown, I had the privilege of getting tickets to The Midnight Online, and at a time that one would be forgiven for having a change in vocals, I mean, Tyler knocked the ball out of the park, man. Aside from the vocal side of things, his writing is deserving of as much praise as anything else is. I know some people don't pay attention to lyrics or lyric meanings, but with such masterful writing on display, I think you'd be stopping short of the full experience if you don't at least have a look. Most of the songs are like mini stories that feed into the thematic side of the album, so there's a whole wealth of information that you can get involved with. Therefore, it can't be any surprise that I give Endless Summer 97 out of 100. For me, it's an incredibly complex and nuanced album filled with deep, riddling lyrics, subtle and strong vocal performances, and some really, really great instrument solos. The reason that it misses out on 100 out of 100 is that I feel like The Equalizer is missing that special something, and it kind of feels like a bit of an outsider. When all things are said and done though, it's by some margin one of the best pieces of electronic music out there, and perhaps one of, if not the finest albums to have ever been produced. As the genre grows and becomes more noticeable and popular, I have absolutely no doubt that Endless Summer will happily sit as a genre-defining milestone. With the release of Nocturnal on October 13th, 2017, Tim and Tyler looked to shift from the extroverted tone of Endless Summer to one more concerned with creating mood and vibes. And I gotta say, it's done with incredible precision. Where Endless Summer felt like a throwback to coming-of-age summers, Nocturnal hits heavy with the neon-drenched night drive vibes. For me, it has the most mature feel of all of the releases and brings an interesting dynamic to a traditionally excitable genre of music. As far as the discography goes, it's definitely one of the releases that I seem to forget about the most. I'm kind of ashamed of it really, because it deserves so much more love than I give it. Packed with returning collaborators Thomas Edding and Nicky Flores and Mad Storm, and featuring new guests Jordi Lienarts of Timecop 1983, Pelle Hilleström, Dan Rocket and Christiane, there's a real sense of identity that Nocturnal excels at. As with Endless Summer and Days of Thunder, you'd be right to expect a great opening song. It takes a little bit of time to get going, and it kind of starts with this soundscape of a city and some footsteps, really sticking us in amongst it in this neon city that the guys have created.
Shadows in the city, I'm a stranger to myself. On these streets I'm someone else. Shadows in the city, like a demon in the dark, come to tear us apart. Neon city.
There is a little bit of contention online over the use of vocal chops in the chorus, and it seems like some people would rather it without them. So if you're one of those people, then you can always stick on the instrumentals. I really like it though. Big fan of vocoders and vocal chops. Consider the sequel to Endless Summer's Jason. Light Years marks the return of Nicky Flores in yet another amazing vocal duet with Tyler. I said before that they work so well together, and here you go again. Nicky would go on to appear on the Horror Show EP with my favourite of her 3 collaborations, Because the Night. Any Springsteen or Patti Smith group fan should definitely look forward to that in a little bit. I'd say that Light Years is most in line with the more recent releases by the group, and doesn't have the same noir tone that the other songs on the record have. Tokyo Night Train. The first time I listened to it, I was reminded of Love on a Real Train by pioneering German group Tangerine Dream. So when I found out it was inspired by them, everything fell into place. Tokyo Night Train has this ethereal sound that's totally unique from the rest of the tracks. Other songs on the album are Collateral, the sequel to Crockett's Revenge, featuring Dan Rocket, Mad Storm and Thomas Edinger. River of Darkness, co-written with Time Cop 1983, featuring Thomas Edinger and Pelle Hilleström, and the title cut Nocturnal, which is a great atmosphere builder. Overall, Nocturnal is that one album by the Midnight that I always seem to overlook. Maybe it's because it has a noticeably different tone to Endless Summer, and my mind doesn't really relate them because of it. Naturally, with any artist there's always going to be some songs that don't hit you as hard as the others, and that doesn't mean that they're not good enough or not worth listening to. I'm not going to sit here and denounce them as being weak, because that'd be an outright lie. If you're into more typical synthwave with a darker tone, then you'll be right at home. Even though I don't consider Nocturnal to be one of my favourites, I'm not ignorant to the craftsmanship of the production and the writing. I think I'd probably give it a rating of about 80 out of 100. Nocturnal packs a real punch, but I think that it falls a little bit short of having the memorability that I would like from an album. I gotta be straight up with you guys from the get-go. It's perfection. In my opinion, Kids is the album that gives me the most nostalgia. Every one of the 9 songs is a masterclass in nostalgia, and it's no surprise considering Tim and Tyler view it as their first themed album. It introduced some themes and characters that would go on to become integral parts of the lore of the Midnight, and overall set the tone for releases going forwards. With the popular Stranger Things serving as inspiration for a kids-centric theme, the band forge a path through memories to create a compelling and evocative album for the ages. Finnish producer Leno Lenyama, aka Leno, takes some writing credit on Lost Boy. Kasper Falkenberg appears on guitar on the tracks Wave and also on Kids, the reprise, which also features the West Los Angeles Children's Choir. With the Kids album, the Midnight have got a world to craft and a plan to stick to, and you'd be damned to get in the way. The album opens with a track called Youth. There's some really poignant words from the 1979 documentary The Information Society, which plays throughout the song. It's quite strange to think that everything we take for granted today once brought so much hope, opportunity, and excitement. The instrumentation might get overlooked because it isn't jumping out at you, but I think it really drives home the theme of youth and nostalgia and sets the stage for my favourite song on the album, Wave.
I'll never even know your name.
In a release filled with so many special songs, it's really hard to pick one that just stands out above the rest. In saying that, there are 2 songs in particular that rise above the already high levels of the others, and that's Wave and America 2. As a matter of fact, those 2 might be my favourite vocal performances across any of the releases. Tyler's ability to cut through the instrumentation with these sharp, crisp vocals never fails to please my ears.
sad, the sky is blue. There are monsters in the spare bedroom. Kids grow up and move away. They close the plant, then the mall arcade. Kids are sad, their parents too. Kids get high in the spare bedroom. We grow up and move away. The seasons pass, but the monsters stay.
Even though Wave and America 2 are my favourites on the album, Kids, both the prelude and the reprise, are the songs that resonate with me most lyrically. It's that feeling of impermanence that's always lurking around the corner. Even though the lyrics are fairly concise and short, there's something about the idea of time passing and moving away from that place that just hits me in the feels. If you're someone who's moved away from a small town to a big city, then you definitely know what I mean. It's like two completely separate worlds.
In the dark, there were no strangers, there were no strangers at all. What was the last word when I met you?
Written with the help of Finnish producer Leno, Lost Boy is another track where Tyler is in his element. With enigmatic lyrics and electric instrumentation straight from a movie, and another delicious synth solo towards the end, it should come as no surprise that it's the most listened to on the album, and I believe a fan favourite in general.
Like the dancer with bruises who gathers the cash when the music is through. No, she don't look back. I've come to look for America too. When we stole the car on the 4th of July, I pawned my guitar.
I know a lot of people that would rate America 2 as their favourite song by The Midnight, full stop. Lyrically, it's a fictional pessimist response to the song America by Simon and Garfunkel, with the line, "I've come to look for America too," being a direct response to the line in the original song, "I've come to look for America." Kojak with the facts, baby. It just has this catchy rhythm that you can't help but bob your head to. Other forms of dancing are available, but when you're out driving, it might be safer just not to be throwing shapes behind the wheel. It might get you in trouble.
Golden galleons, golden guns to find their place under the sun. There's a song on the Sahara wind that lifts you to your feet again. The dance is on the clockwork stars that pulses through a beating heart.
You can see that the whole album is like this ode to childhood by this song alone. Explorers feels like this shout out to all those kids who grew up in a time before the internet, where you'd go out on your bike with your friends all day. There was no mobile phones, you just vibed outside. Even though the band has fans of all ages, I feel like the song amplifies the feelings predominantly for those people. Thematically, as we see with the Kids album, being able to interweave this perspective of growing up in the 80s and the 90s gives this unique viewpoint that adults in that time might not have. The remaining songs on the album are Saturday Mornings, a nice mashup of some old TV ads including Blockbuster Video, Arcade Dreams, which is an instrumental track great to vibe to in the sun, and Kids, the reprise, the follow-up to the prelude, which comes back bigger and better, with a nice little guitar solo and some great depth added by the West Los Angeles Children's Choir. You wouldn't expect to find a choir in Synthwave, but here we are, breaking down boundaries. Even though I have my apprehensions about awarding Kids 100 out of 100, I'm gonna do it anyway. My only reason not to would be that it might make other ratings look unfairly low, but I think that I've given them enough credit for it to not look that way. For someone who grew up in the tail end of the eras that it takes influence from, I said it before, I'll say it again, it is perfect. I spent most of my childhood without access to the wider world save the occasional supervised time on the internet. It felt like there was this unknown magical world all stored in this little black box in my living room. Now, 15 years later, I'm using that box, not the same one, obviously, but I'm using that box to talk to people all around the world about this very thing. And it's a weird thought, how things seem to change and the only time that you really notice is when you stop and look back. which is probably why music like this evokes so much emotion. Beyond sounding amazing and having lyrics that read like an ode to youth and childhood, The Midnight have created a piece of art for all of those who still have that urge of discovery and exploration in them. It's the same feeling I get while watching The Goonies or E.T. I can't describe it, but I have music that does all the talking that I need to. Before we shift over to the Monsters album, there's some great context in the Midnight fanzine, part of the expansion pass on their web store. It's all about the mysterious and elusive monsters. In the foreword to the fanzine, Tyler muses that the monster we fear, except in rare cases of trauma, exists only in our head. Yet, we still create the beasts even when, or especially, if they are not there. The monster is a characterization of the space that we hold our pain before we have the capacity to deal with it. The monster is more of a signpost, a psychological scaffold than a mythological creature. He is our raw pain personified. But because the shadow serves as proof of the sun, the shadow side of our monster is surely the possibility that love might be every bit as glorious and everlasting as we secretly hoped it would be, as we still hope it will be. Knowing that information is going to help you decipher a lot of meanings within the album itself, but also on the kids' album, as they are set within the same universe. So with that laid out, let's move into the spare bedroom and try and find the monsters. Not that anyone really needs reminding, but 2020 was a year filled with adversity, loss, and ire. The world was once again divided by fear and began creating a whole new wave of monsters. In the midst of all that hubbub, Tim and Tyler opened up the doors to the kids' universe once again on July 10th, with the release of the Monsters album. As a thematic continuation of the universe, Monsters deals with the rigours and adversities that we face as we navigate through our teenage years and into early adulthood. In my opinion, it redefined the sound of the band for the better, although I didn't necessarily feel that way right from the get-go. In fact, I remember the day that it came out. Come last train, and I found myself feeling left on the platform. Sure, I enjoyed it, but I didn't feel it, and that left me feeling a little bit empty and miserable for the rest of the evening. I'm always aware of the saying by French novelist Marcel Proust that you should never meet the people you admire because you'll surely be disappointed. If there's one thing that you can take away from that quote, is that putting people on this pedestal is never a good thing, because you only doom them to a fate of failure. And to be honest, I think I was guilty of it. I'd been waiting for new music for a couple of years at that point. I'd found myself immersed in this universe that stimulated all of my positive memories of growing up, and I built this sonic wall around me. I'd become too familiar with what made me feel good, and I'd built up Monsters to this unattainable level of escapism that it could never achieve. After spending the subsequent days and nights listening to the album, I dropped my guard fairly quickly and found that I enjoyed all of the songs and each of their idiosyncrasies. Talking about the creative direction of the album, Tim said that the goal was to broaden the palette, to sonically evolve the music as well as expand what is traditionally accepted in the synthwave genre. With elements taking inspiration from soft rock, lo-fi hip-hop and trance, you could definitely say that Monsters is as eclectic a release as any. With new collaborators Jesse Malloy, Lelia Broussard, Colin McLaughlin, Daniel Davidson, and Izzy Fontaine joining Midnight veterans Oliver McEwan and Thomas Edinger, Tim and Tyler opened the mall to a wealth of talent. The album itself was also mastered by Emily Lazar and Chris Allgood at The Lodge in New York. Although previous releases provided a foundation for the Midnight verse, I still think there was an absence of any real bridge between fans and the band other than live tours and meet and greets. You see, when we consume music, film, or television, we have a tendency to forget that somebody spent a healthy chunk of time on what we're consuming, just because it's generally compacted into easily consumable chunks. We're typically left as outsiders to the process that evolves from an idea to a finished product. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm a lover of behind-the-scenes footage and DVD commentary. Learning how people evolve these ideas and tweak them to perfection is something that's so interesting to see, but I can appreciate that it isn't for everyone. Post-Monsters release, Tim and Tyler built a bridge between them and the community in the form of an ARG that ran from September 24th to October 15th, 2020. It brought listeners far and wide into this universe that they'd created, and the opening of the official Midnight Discord on September 25th provided a place for new fans and old fans alike to gather and appreciate life together. But we'll get to that a little bit later on in the video. By this point, it's kind of standard that the opening track in the album acts as a gateway into the thematic universe. 1991, the intro, not only references the year the first webpage went live, but would go on to be thematically important for the ARG. Those who used the first incarnations of the World Wide Web may just be transported back in time when the dial-up modem sound hits, and also when the song beautifully fades into America Online. America Online. I would have to give it a little bit of thought just to be sure, but it's definitely in contention as my favourite song that they've ever made. There's just something about America Online that scratches the nostalgia itch in a way that none other can. Perhaps it's the serum synth, the echo melt effect, the isotope vocoding of Tyler's vocals. In truth, it's perfection. In an interview with Magnetic magazine, Tim said of America Online that it sets the tone for our album. We're in the era of connectivity. Gone are the days of being a kid, riding around on bikes, exploring the world around you. You're a teen now, and your nights are spent online in your bedroom, logged onto chat rooms while the door to your parents is shut, and you're searching for your own identity. In my life, I've experienced both of those timelines, and the transition between the two of them wasn't something that I really paid much mind to. In retrospect, I see it, I feel it, and perhaps most of all, I hear it in America Online. Featuring Oliver McEwan on synth bass and Thomas Edinger on saxophone, Dance as Somebody was actually my #1 song by the midnight on my 2020 Spotify Wrapped. It's really such a feel-good song, a real dancing song, which is the message of the song. Life's too short to dance by yourself. As Tyler said to American Songwriter magazine, sometimes it's a Friday night and you just can't help it. You have to go dancing, and I'll drink to that.
When you're 17, the thought of a spark could start a fire. Tube top and faded jeans, how we forget how we desire. We were 17, we had city dreams, we were 17, we had city dreams, we were 17.
17 was succinctly described by Tim as a song drenched in nostalgia and wistfulness. Memories of being young and falling in love for the first time. The kind of all-consuming love that makes you want to run away together. By the nature of being human, we're unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, bound to fall in love at some point and experience those same feelings. Having a song about retrospective love and optimism is something different, and I'm here for it. Just before prom night, there is Dream Away, which nearly made the previews but lost out to 17 purely on a narrative level. But I really like the song, and the chorus is such a bop, honestly. Dream Away is followed by The Search for Echo, one of the few instrumentals on the album and described as an homage to the video game Echo the Dolphin.
There's an open floor as the chorus soars, and a pretty girl.
Prom night is a super interesting one for me. The best way to describe it would be like being in a temporal shift. Whether that's to do with the lyrics, the synth keys, or Izzy Fontaine's guitaring, I don't know. See, in Britain, proms are a thing, but nowhere near on the level that they are in America. Needless to say, the concept of a prom always appealed to me, but as a spotty-faced teenager, it was never going to be as idyllic as it was in the movies. With the release of Prom Night as a single on June 24th, the band released a playlist builder on their website where you could put your name and the year that you went to prom, and it would generate this really cool custom playlist of popular songs from that time. It was a nice touch, and definitely a pretty cool way to reminisce with your friends. Between Prom Night and The Monsters, there was a song called Fire in the Sky, which is actually a reimagining of a song of Tyler's from 2016, which is a companion song to Deep Blue.
But that fire died, dead and gone. I was wrong, love's a call. I'm a monster.
Monsters.
Monsters featuring the wonderful Jupiter Winter. The title song from the album, and boy, does it not disappoint. Featuring Lelia Broussard of Jupiter Winter, it's another song that hits hard and drops in and out with lighter verses and heavy synth-filled choruses. During the ARG, we got a lot of information about the song and the lyrical influences from the world of tarot cards. In a tweet from September 2020, Tyler explains that the lines, "It could have been paradise, we could have had diamond eyes," was inspired by the Lover's card in his Voyager deck, where they share a set of diamond eyes. If you're into that kind of stuff, I'm sure you'll pick up on all kinds of references scattered throughout the song and the album at large. As I'm sure you're used to by now, I'm going to break my own rules once again by including an extra song from the Monsters album that I wasn't originally going to put in, but during the writing of this video I felt that it was kind of fair to give it some airtime just because of how I'd mistreated it during my own listening. It's called Helvetica, and I think that it's important to get the message across because you might not like it at first. I know I didn't because I thought the pitch changes were a little bit strange. To give it some context, Tim says that Helvetica is about the late nights spent alone, the pale light from the CRT monitor reflecting onto our face while the world around you is fast asleep. The construction of the song itself is actually pretty interesting, with the final song being a sampled version of the original which is being run through TAL Software's TAL sampler. Just give it a chance is all I say. There's a little cluster of songs in the album that didn't make the previews that I'm going to give you a little bit of information of now instead of leaving it to the end. I left Brooklyn out of the previews purely because I think that you should listen to it with someone that you love. It's a really beautifully written song, and the minimalist production style only helps push the lyrics across. There's also Deep Blue, which during the ARG, we learned that Tim and Tyler were approached to soundtrack a Hollywood movie, and that Deep Blue was originally written as part of that process, but was later reworked and added into the Monsters album. There's a really powerful saxophone solo from Jesse Malloy, who absolutely blows the track out of the water. I had a few conversations with Jesse, and he's a really great guy, and seeing him perform the solo live as part of the Midnight Online concert was a real pleasure. There's Night Skies, which is an interesting combination of blues and synthwave. I'm not really a huge fan of it, but I could definitely understand why others might be. And then following off the list of the songs that didn't make the previews, there is City Dreams, which acts as an interlude between Night Skies and Last Train. It's another song that was really unlucky not to make the previews. Described by Tyler as a palate cleanser before the denouement, City Dreams is one of my favourites on the album. Speaking of the song, Tim stated that it's vaporwave in its purest. The echoes of 17 tie it back to the start of the album and really makes it clear that this was all a memory, a photograph that is now faded. I think it's a poignant callback to part of our own lives that we only see in our dreams, etched into our brains for us to revisit in our darkest moments. Then it's time to catch the last train.
The top shelf tumbles and the wall clocks run the well. Scotch bottles and the soda guns.
Featuring some hypnotic guitaring from Izzy Fontaine, Last Train is the fitting conclusion to an emotional and wistful sonic journey. I've been listening to this song on repeat for days now, and it still hasn't lost its importance to me. As Tyler said in the Magnetic Magazine interview, City Dreams feels like the interlude that speeds up time and suddenly our protagonist is 10 years in the future. But the same themes keep echoing back. Love still cuts like a wire, it's still no less of a risk. But the hope is that as we grow, we learn how to not be totally overwhelmed by these feelings, but to embrace them. This song is a glimpse at the lessons learned in adolescence and the mystery that still survives into adulthood. Which is fitting, really. Monsters is a dramatically more mature release than Kids, but still holds its themes of romance, childhood and nostalgia tightly. It mirrors real life in that even though we grow up, we still hold tightly to the things that we loved when we were younger. They almost become a part of who we are, and as such, we're far more complicated as people than we could ever imagine. There's some really exemplary production on this album, and even though it took me a little time to come around to, I'd still give it around 94 out of 100. At a time where the world was looking introspectively for the wrong reasons, Monsters came and gave listeners something to be optimistic about. A shared catalyst for nostalgic absorption and a platform on which to be united. It's not often that you can have such an all-encompassing reach as artists, but Tim and Tyler proved that it could be done. That no matter our differences in times of struggle, that the world is still just one beating heart. Initially released on October 16, 2020, only 3 months after the release of Monsters, Horror Show marked a flashback to the darker, noir themes and sounds of Nocturnal. Originally revealed during the ARG, Horror Show was produced with the help of Essinger, an American producer with a talent for heavier, darker electronic music. Horror Show also sees the return of saxophonist Jesse Malloy and vocalist Nikki Flores, and the addition of American guitarist Maddie Rice. Luke Laird, Natalie Hemby, Micah Dalton, Patti Smith and Bruce Springsteen all feature as writing credits. The album itself was mastered by Emily Lazar at The Lodge in New York and was originally released on Amazon Music. One thing I really love about Horror Show is just how well it fits in with the Halloween season. Halloween is that time of year that I look forward to the most. Not necessarily October 31st, but that time in general. I suppose normal people would probably just call it autumn. As much as I really enjoy the warm weather, something about things being dark by 6 is appealing to me. Anyway, I should probably start spinning some discs. The EP opens with a song titled The Stranger. In it, you can hear a fella running in what sounds like a wolf or a werewolf. Let's keep it creepy, werewolf howling. It builds up quite nicely and then dissipates into an arpeggio duet. It's quite minimalist compared to previous releases, but it definitely sets the tone and brings a looming aura as we transition to Ghost in Your Stereo.
In the undertow, you're just a lost song I wrote, and I'm just a ghost in your stereo.
Ghost in Your Stereo is one of those songs that lures you in with open, welcoming vocals before snapping you up with that dark, cutting bass synthesizer. The production on this song really brings forth creepy and sinister vibes, which fits perfectly with the overall theme. When I'm listening to it, I definitely get 80s horror movie vibes, and as a fan of 80s horror movies, I really couldn't ask for more.
Don't fall in love with the man on stage. I'll be on in a minute, I'm just sharpening my blade. Don't fall for his flattering to
When I talk about incredible production on this release, tracks like Neon Medusa just encapsulate everything that I mean. Tyler comes into the fray with these powerful, mystical lyrics which are underpinned with hypnotic arpeggio and pad combo. The drop in this song is immaculate, which I imagine was helped by Essinger's experience with similar things in their music. And I'm gonna use a bit of profanity. Maddie Rice's guitar solo fucking rocks. I mean, seriously, it is incredible. During the Midnight Online concert, Royce Whittaker of Jupiter Winter had the duty of charming the Neon Medusa himself, and let me tell you, he absolutely slayed the solo. It was even better live, and that's so hard to achieve with an already flawless piece of fretting. Perhaps like Homer in Treehouse of Horror 4, Royce and Maddie sold their souls to the devil. What an elaborate and convenient way to segue into Devil Make a Deal.
It's alright to let go, and nobody has to see what's between you and me. Is you and me.
Anyone who knows me knows how much I love the synthesizers, and the drop in Devil Make a Deal is almost certain to make me go feral. It's so groovy, and the arp and percussion behind it ensures that it has enough dimension for you to latch on to so many different sounds.
Cut your hair, changed your name, left a note as you escaped. To thine own self be true, but there was no gold in those hills, no platinum in those pretty pills, just werewolves tossing dollar bills in the wine dark sea of Malibu. The curse of small size, easily acquired. It's time to set your gasoline heart on fire.
Lyrically, Good in Red might be my favourite in the album, and the chorus is one of my favourites across all of their discography. Even though the song has a dark theme, I can't help but feel that the lyrics are powerfully motivating. A story about a character overcoming their demons and fighting to live a better, positive life after moving to a place where the grass once looked greener. It's something that we can all associate with no matter where we come from or where we're going, and I like music like that. Obviously, my interpretation of the lyrics could be busted open, but I like to think that it has some truth to it. The EP rounds off with one of the best covers of a song I think that I've ever heard. As much as I like the Bruce Springsteen and Patti Smith Group versions, the Midnight's version brings a much-deserved contemporary setting for such a powerful song. I've already spoken before about how well Tyler and Nicky go together as a duet, and I'd argue that Because the Night is the finest of them all, and the inclusion of another Jesse Malloy sax solo is the cherry on the top. There's an edited shorter version of Neon Medusa that's featured on the EP, but I decided to not include it because you've already heard the regular version. For me, Horror Show shines in a place where I felt Nocturnal wasn't as bright. I think it benefits from the thematic route of writing and production that the guys have taken since Kids. The EP comes together fluidly and really excels at creating a moody, sinister and thriller-like atmosphere. If the Halloween season could have a soundtrack, I'm sure that Horror Show would love to tip its hat in the ring. And for that reason, I'd give it a 94 out of 100, easily. Even though it might not contain all of my favourite songs, it works cohesively together, and as far as listening experiences go, it's about as good as it gets. The addition of Essinger in the writing and production process, in my opinion, paid dividends for the EP. Not to detract from Nocturnal or any of the other collaborators, but I feel having that focus of someone already deeply rooted in that sort of electronic music helps provide a strong skeleton on which to build. The addition of Nicky, Jesse and Maddie brought the perfect amount of flair to the tracks, and although it may have been a step away from the usual upbeat tracks that are usually associated with the band, No one could have preempted the direction that Tim and Tyler were about to take with their third EP and most recent major release on July 23rd, 2021. Everything is clear in the rearview mirror, the opening line to Endless Summer's Memories. The notion that in retrospect, everything is clearer and easier to make sense of. Whether you see it as regret or lessons learned, it's hard to argue that hindsight isn't a toxic elixir for those who find themselves lost in the past. There's a reason that orchestras in one form or another have been around for hundreds of years. Pit orchestras have given so much emotion and dynamism to stage performances for centuries, so the decision to transform some of their best songs from Endless Summer into orchestral pieces is one that I welcomed with open arms. Reimagined and arranged in an orchestral context, Tim and Tyler turned to Mina Choi for help with a new angle of production. Here's a little clip of Mina explaining what the Magic Orchestra are and what they do.
Alright, roll in? Okay. My name is Mina Choi and I'm the founder of the Magic Orchestra, which I started in 2008. The orchestra was made to collaborate with people traditionally outside of the classical music industry, so film composers, bands, anybody who's always wanted to work with an orchestra but didn't maybe know how to do it.
As with all the other releases, I've done my best to give credit to those involved in the production, and I'll do the same thing here. The Rearview Mirror was produced by Mina Choi, with vocal production done by Tim, vocal editing by Royce Whitaker, vocals by Tyler, and orchestral arrangements, music direction, and conducting also done by Mina. Within the Magic Orchestra, we have Liana Berube, Stephanie Bibbo, Evan Price, Kathy Marshall-Biggs, Ivo Bakulik, Marcel Gemperli, Lucas Chen, Erin Wang, Stephanie Payne, Katrina Walter, Jeff Anderley, Jason Slotter, Debbie Nayer, and Meredith Clark. The EP was engineered by Gabriel Shepard with assistance from Jace Mann and was recorded at 25th Street Recording with mixing by Adam Munoz at 501st Street Studios, and the mastering was done by Sarah Regis. I know that this kind of stuff isn't to everyone's taste, but for me, it catapulted songs that I already loved into a completely new dimension. There was an entirely new wave of nostalgia that I got from the EP. I'm not sure whether it was tied to the same kind of nostalgia that the regular versions gave me, or something entirely different. I almost feel like it's nostalgia for the first time that I heard the original songs, like some kind of meta nostalgia trip. The orchestral versions have this air of maturity to them, which I think lends itself to the breadth of experience within the Magic Orchestra, as well as the original lyrics and arrangement on Endless Summer.
Skyline looked like a stained glass window. The city sang such mad crescendo. 4 bare feet on a rain-soaked street. Summer air brushed fever dream.
Given that Endless Summer is one of my favourite songs of all time anyway, I think I would be remiss to leave it out of the previews. It gives me such a nostalgic feeling, like I'm back watching The Simpsons after school or watching Casper the Ghost with the sliding door open and the warm evening breeze billowing up my top. Unlike some of the non-orchestral pieces that make me feel a bit sad, this rendition of Endless Summer fills me with happiness. For me, it's like Last Train, where everything has kind of come full circle. It's a bittersweet feeling.
Where shadow people dance and trade their glance and walk home alone.
On July 9th, 2021, a few weeks before the release of the EP, fans were treated with vampires. I really like the cello that takes the place of the saxophone, and the tone that it brings is just magical. Vampires is a sterling example of the amount of depth that an orchestra can bring to a piece of music, and every time you listen to it, you can find a new instrument to pick up and follow throughout the piece. Toward the end of the song, everything comes together with this grand, imposing feeling which suits Vampires really well.
Gave me a song to sing, dancing in your room, innocent and true, Elvis tattoo on your shoulder.
If there's one song on the Rearview Mirror that I would pick as my favourite, it would probably be the one from which it derives its name, Memories. An already beautiful, emotional and soldad song which is made even better by the organic sound of the orchestra. As two of my other favourite songs from Endless Summer, I was really happy to hear The Comeback Kid and Sunset being reimagined by the Magic Orchestra. I think these renditions give The Comeback Kid a feeling of maturity and romance that I don't think the regular version has. That's not a dig though. The Endless Summer version is more youthful, optimistic and hopeful, which suits it. But this version feels like a confession of love, a heartbreaking one. Perhaps more of a personal ballad of pain than one of optimism, but still with a glimmer of hope. And I feel like Sunset enjoys the same maturity as The Comeback Kid, except from I think it feels more positive and powerful. And much like the regular version, I still think it would be the perfect song to be at the end of a movie. Even though some people are at odds with how they feel about the Rearview Mirror, I personally couldn't be happier. I'm a big fan of things like Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini, so having the rich, deep, organic sound of an orchestra on songs that already have a profound influence on my life was always going to be a winner. Much like the Kids album, I'm going to give the Rearview Mirror 100 out of 100. I know that full marks will be contentious, but I'm also factoring in the originality of the concept and how well it's executed. Watching musicians translate their music into other genres and seeing how they shift and fall into place within their new parameters is fascinating. I would never been able to predict that Tim and Tyler would take it in this direction, but it sets an exciting precedent going forward under that motto of combine, not confine. Speaking of combine, I've saved the next little section until now because I wasn't quite sure how to fit it in among the major releases. Throughout the remix contests at the Midnight of Hell, there has been so much incredible work done by so many artists. The remixes have been put into two albums titled The Midnight Remixed 1 and The Midnight Remixed 2, as well as a few remixes that weren't put into compilations, like the winner of the second Midnight Remix competition, Droid Bishop's remix of Deep Blue. During the first lockdown in March 2020, the Midnight held a remix competition for their listeners. Budding remixers could pick from Los Angeles, The Comeback Kid, Rivers of Darkness or Explorers, and the stems for each could be obtained via the band's website. Over 500 entries were counted, with 20 winners being selected. If you're interested in checking them all out, there's a link in the description and the pinned comment. There's a wide range of styles on show, so you may even find a new artist to listen to. Following the successes of the first remix competition, a second competition entitled The Midnight Remix Radio Volume 2 was opened for entries on February 5th, 2021. Whereas the previous competition only had 4 songs available, this competition made the entirety of the Monsters album stems available for purchase at a cost of $20. Unlike the first volume, the judging for the second competition was done live on Twitch for fans to view along. 13 songs were selected as winners, with the previously mentioned Droid Bishop remix of Deep Blue taking the spot of overall winner. So with the success of those 2 previous remix competitions, I wouldn't be surprised if a further remix competition is to take place in the near future as part of the next album. Encouraging creativity and giving their audience the opportunity to experiment with their music is such a great initiative to take as creators. It's also refreshing to see how open they are about their creating process. Tim and Tyler can often be found on Twitch streaming different parts of the creation process and just hanging out with fans. That down-to-earth approach is something that I think makes them stand out among other creators. And I suppose part of that incubation of creativity comes from how wide and reaching their own creativity goes. After all, we're not talking about only music, but the creation of an entire universe, the Midnightverse. I'm sure by now you've become accustomed to the suffix verse being added to pretty much anything, but I assure you, the Midnightverse is not the work of shady internet figures or a pyramid scheme. The Midnightverse is the community's name for the world created by Tim and Tyler through their music. It's one thing to create great music and another to cultivate a passionate and loyal audience, but creating lore that bridges you and that audience together is another level. Some people might prefer only listening to the music and not being involved in anything else, and that's completely okay. I think it just makes things a lot better if you do. As much as I know certain people would love nothing more than a down the rabbit hole style section encompassing the entire lore of the Midnightverse, that's just not really possible within the confines of this video. But while I'm here, I just want to give a little shout out to everyone in the Discord for being such a welcoming and loving group for every new person that joins. If you really enjoy their music and you haven't checked the Discord out yet, I think you're missing out. As with other external things, I'll put a link in the description for you to follow. The server was created on September 25th, 2020 as a place for people to share ideas, theories and clues as part of the ARG, and in that time it's grown to a little over 1,500 members. Every couple of weeks, the server hosts listening parties for albums for everyone to join. The community was brought together during the 1991 Text ARG back in 2020 and has grown to be a hub for music, arts, pets, photography and so many other facets of life. If you're wanting a fairly comprehensive timeline of the ARG, you can check it out on the official Discord or head over to the official wiki for the band, although the latter's timeline is still under construction, so at the time of writing at least, it only reaches part 4. The website for the game is still live, so I'd encourage you to head over to the Discord and pick up some of the clues and enjoy the narrative firsthand. I'm sure it would be enjoyable to listen to, but it's definitely more enjoyable to experience it for yourself. Within the Discord, there's also a chronicling of the rewards from the game, which you can access at any time regardless of whether you play the game yourself. So if alternate reality games aren't really your thing, but you still want the goodies, you can just go straight for the loot. Even though it's only a small part of their history as a band, the ARG is definitely one of my favourite things that they've done. Not just because it's fun or that we get rewards for playing it, it's because of the time and effort that goes into it. The game is free to play, and there's no cost associated with it unless you're being pedantic and count power costs and internet costs. It's a special way to get the community further involved with your work and also to develop the thematic universe in which your music is set. They could just release music and let people get on with it, but they made the conscious decision to involve us more in their work, and that has to be admired and respected from a creative perspective. It's so easy for us listeners to just be, well, listeners, consumers, passive conduits for your craft. It takes something else to give back to those fans and let them in on the work that you do, to develop this sense of family, a community, that you're all together as one. And that about brings us to the curtains. If you've made it here, I'd like to think that you've enjoyed yourself. Maybe you've found new music to listen to, or you've enriched your listening experience with some extra knowledge or context. Perhaps you actually find me really interesting, or maybe you've just fallen asleep, in which case, hello, I'm in your dreams. You're lucid dreaming about me talking. With any luck, I've done the Midnight some justice with this video. Tim and Tyler, if you're watching this, thank you both so much for all the time and effort that you put into the music and everything else that goes with it. This video has been a real labour of love, and even though it's occupied most of my time for a month or so, I wouldn't take any of it back. If you liked it, share it with someone close to you. If you're new to the band, throw on some of their music. If you can afford to, pick up physical or digital versions for keeps. Grab some merchandise on their online store. Just show them some love. They deserve the support, especially with how hard the past 2 years have been on musicians and artists in general. I'd like to think that all of this sentimentality will be relegated to my childhood. But growing up is the realization that all of the experiences that I'm having now will one day be nothing but memories. Transient feelings spurred by smiles on photographs and the enveloping rays of the morning sun. To be able to find those feelings again through music is a privilege. And for me, none do it better than the Midnight, masters of nostalgia. Thank you.